Hi everyone. I'm Ziada Kabilbekova, and I will be the leader of this session. The session is called The Truth, Propaganda, and Persuasion, and welcome everyone. I will begin a new course, and I want to start by telling you what this course is not about. This course is not about tanks or battles or military strategy. It's more about something far more invisible and in many ways far more powerful. It is about how governments and media organizations convinced millions of ordinary people to support a war, to hate an enemy, sacrifice their comfort, and in some cases, even to commit terrible acts. And this was all through words, images, and even sounds. Okay, today's lecture is called What is Propaganda? Like the birth of information warfare. And by the end of our time together, I hope you will never look at news headline, poster, or social media in quite the same way again. Let's begin. Okay, um, just a second. Okay, first, before we dive in, let me tell you what you should be able to do by the end of this lecture. First, you should be able to define what propaganda is and explain how it is different from simply giving someone information or trying to persuade them. Second, you should understand why propaganda became so powerful in the 20th century specifically, what has changed, what technologies made it possible and impossible. Third, you should be able to look at the real historical example and explain how it was designed to influence people. And finally, we will develop a set of media literacy tools that you can use not just in this course, but every single day when you encounter news, social media, and advertising. Okay, I want to begin with a quote. It was written by Joseph Goebbels, the man that Adolf Hitler appointed as the Minister of Propaganda for Nazi Germany, and this was the most dangerous communicators in human history. He wrote that the most brilliant propagandist technique will yield no success unless one fundamental principle is borne in mind constantly. It must confine itself. Um, it must confine itself to a few points and repeat them over and over. Over and over. Um, in this quote, he's not talking about the evidence. He's saying that we should pick a simple message and repeat it until people believe it. And here is the truly disturbing part that it works. Whenever someone is repeated on the news, social media, we start to believe it, and mostly we are encouraged to do this and that things that were advertised. So first we have a warm-up activity. Before I give you any more theory, I want you to think about your own experience. So here's my question. Have you ever changed your mind about something, a person or product, an event, a political issue, because of a news headline, a social media post, or an advertisement? I want you to think critically at this point and give me any suggestions, any ideas that you might have. Okay, if there are no thoughts about this topic, we can just go to the theory and look through it. Okay, what is actually the propaganda? Okay, first let's establish the definition of this. And I want to be clear, like this is information. It may be true, false, or misleading that spreads systematically to promote a particular cause, ideology, or a point of view, often by appealing to emotions rather than reason. So notice a few things in that definition. First, propaganda does not have to be false. Some of the most effective propaganda in history was technically true. It simply left out inconvenient facts or presented truth in a way designed to manipulate. So most of the leaders during the World War II were manipulating through the truths that they were spreading through social media. Second, it appeals to emotions and not reasons. Like propaganda is not trying to help you think clearly. It is trying to make you feel something first and then act on that feeling. Now, I want to distinguish three things that are often confused. Like information. Information is balanced and factual. It gives you what you need to form your own opinion. A weather report is information, for example. A scientific study is also an information. The second is persuasion. A persuasion is one-sided. It has a point of view, but it is honest about that. And an opinion column that says, I believe we should raise taxes, for example, is persuasion. You know the author is arguing a position that was stated before by the government or any other person. Okay, and the propaganda. Propaganda is very different. Like it pretends to be neutral. It pretends to be neutral. First, everyone sees it as a neutral position, but it overwhelms with your emotions, or it repeats a message so many times, so you stop questioning it. Its goal is not to inform you, is not to persuade you. It's like even to control what you believe. And the line between these three can be extremely blurry. So, and that is done deliberately. The propaganda is done extremely deliberately. The best propaganda never looks like propaganda. You will never know that it is propaganda actually until someone reveal it centuries later. So, there is a sorting game. For each one, we have different positions. Like, for example, for example a government poster showing a soldier with the slogan, "Your country needs you, and least today." So this this is propaganda, for example, because it is designed to trigger patriotism and personal duty. There is no balanced information here, only an emotional comment that you need to do this. Example B. A newspaper article listing the number of casualties on both sides of a battle, and this is information, or at least it should be, because though we should always ask who is counting and who might be undercounting in this term. Example C says a radio broadcast describing a radio broadcast saying the enemy are subhuman monsters who want to destroy your family. And this is a real propaganda because it is a very dangerous kind of it, because dehumanizing the enemy makes violence feel justified. Like they are justifying the crime that they want you to commit a crime, so they will justify it later. And this exact technique was used extensively in Nazi Germany and beyond of it. Example D. A school textbook chapter on the causes of World War II with people perspectives. With multiple perspectives, I'm sorry. And this is information. But here is a question again. There is a question, like, can a textbook ever be truly neutral? who wrote it. It depends on who is the author of this textbook, which country published it, and what did they choose to include or leave out. Because and what is the lesson? Like the categories are real. Like we need to answer these questions first, then see is it a real information given in the textbook, because textbook can never be neutral. So, why did propaganda ever explode? Now propaganda is not new actually, because rulers have always tried to control the narrative. Like it has happened all the time. Like each and every empire had manipulations through propaganda. Um, Roman emperors put their faces on coins. Medieval churches used stained glass windows to tell biblical stories to illiterate population. But something changed in the 20th century, and it changed dramatically due to the technology rise. So in the 1880s, mass circulation newspapers began reaching millions of people for the first time. And for the first time in history, the same story could be read by an entire city or an entire nation. So on the same morning, in 1895, the cinema was invented. And suddenly, moving images could make people feel they were witnessing events, battles, heroism, suffering. From their seats in a darkened room, the emotional power was unlike anything before. So, through cinemas, people could influence others only through the emotional part. In the 1920s, radio entered the home. And now a single voice, a politician, a broadcaster, could speak directly into the living rooms of people, of millions of people simultaneously. And actually, it was immediate, and it felt personal. By the 1930s, the Nazi Party in Germany understood better than anyone what this meant. Under Goebbels, every newspaper, every radio station, every cinema, every theater was brought under state control. The result was the most comprehensive propaganda system in history. And by 1939 to 1945, every major power, democratic and authoritarian alike, had a full propaganda ministry coordinating its messaging. And a key insight here is that propaganda didn't become more powerful because people became more uh, gullible. It became more powerful because technology allowed the same message to reach more people faster than ever before. Okay, propaganda's four missions. So what was wartime propaganda actually trying to do? I want to give you a framework here. Like, there are three core missions. Uh, so actually, there are three core missions that every major power pursued through their propaganda. The mission one is boost morale. War is exhausting, actually, terrifying and costly for each and every country, nation. And because people lose family members, food is rationed, and cities were bombed at that time without deliberate and sustained effort to keep the population hopeful and committed, support collapsed. So propaganda celebrated heroes, downplayed defeats, and reminded citizens what they were fighting for. The mission two is to demonize the enemy. And this is the exact strategy that was used during the World War II by Nazi Germany. They were demonizing their enemy. So this one is morally the most troubling and historically the most dangerous, because mostly each and every nation um, during the wartime tries to demonize their enemy. Okay, if soldiers are going to kill and civilians are going to support killing, it becomes psychologically easier if the enemy is portrayed as less than human. So they portray them like they are monsters, they are not like us, they deserve what is coming. And we will see a very specific example of this when we study Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. So, mission 3 is the control of information. This one is perhaps the most subtle because no one knows that the information is controlled during the wartime. So it was not just about spreading messages, and it was mostly about preventing alternative messages from reaching the public. And the newspapers that reported bad news were shut down. Rumors were suppressed, and the defeatist speech was criminalized. Without competing information, the official narrative goes unchallenged. And we can notice that all three of these missions are still pursued today, like in wartime and often outside of it. So, the case study of the United Kingdom. The first national case study is the United Kingdom. Britain was in a mostly uniquely difficult position at the start of the war. After the trauma of World War I, which killed nearly 1 million of British soldiers, there was enormous public reluctance to fight again. And in 1940, after the fall of France and the evacuation in Dunkirk, Britain stood almost alone against Nazi Germany. And the propaganda challenge was enormous. Like, how do you maintain the will to fight when things look genuinely catastrophic? The answer was a campaign built around resilience. Like, the most famous example is one you almost certainly recognize, like, keep calm and carry on. And here is a historical footnote for this, that this posture, keep calm and carry on, was designed in 1933 as a moral message to be distributed if Germany invaded Britain. It was never officially released during the war. It was rediscovered after the war in the year 2001, if I'm not mistaken. And yet today, it is one of the most recognized pieces of wartime imagery in the world. Like, what does that tell us about how propaganda becomes cultural memory? And the Dig for Victory campaign was also held at that time, and that had a very different approach. So it made more sacrifices. It made sacrifices feel more like an empowerment. And rather than saying that go without food, it said grow your own. And it turned hardship into agency. And also, here the BBC played a big role. BBC played a role that was genuinely remarkable because broadcasting into occupied Europe, maintaining credibility by occasionally reporting bad news alongside good, and this made it trusted in ways that German state radio never was. And Churchill's speeches broadcast by the BBC became some of the most powerful pieces of political rhetoric in history during the World War II. So the next one is the case study for the United States. And the United States presented an interesting case because America didn't enter the war until December 1941, and after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. So before that, American public opinion was deeply divided because many Americans wanted no part of a European war. They didn't want to engage with it. And so the American propaganda challenge had an extra step. First, convince the public that fighting is necessary at all. And the second is the Office of War Information that was created in 1942. This Office of War Information coordinated the entire national messaging effort, like posters, radio, newspapers, films, and nothing was left to chance, like literally nothing. Perhaps the most enduring image to emerge from American wartime propaganda is Rosie the Riveter, the "We Can Do It" poster from 1943. It was created to encourage women to enter the workforce and fill the factory jobs left by men who had enlisted. So, interestingly, it worked. But here is what is historically interesting. The poster was barely seen during the war itself, again, like the British system, because it became iconic decades later. And when the feminist movement discovered it discovered it as a symbol of female empowerment. The creators intended one message, however, history attached a completely different one. And this is a pattern we can see repeatedly with propaganda. The message that outlives its original context and takes on new meanings. And then there is the other thing is Hollywood. The American film industry mobilized almost immediately because Frank Capra, the director of classic films like It's a Wonderful Life, was commissioned by the US Army to produce a documentary series called Why We Fight. And these films were shown to soldiers and civilians alike, like explaining in accessible, emotional terms exactly why the United States needed to be in this war, and this has worked. So here is the case study for Nazi Germany. So here we are about to discuss that. Okay, we are studying Nazi propaganda, not because we want to understand how it worked, and we want to prevent it from working again. So, Nazi Germany under Goebbels represented the most systematic and comprehensive and moreover deadly propaganda operation in modern history. The first thing was the total media control. The first thing the Nazis did upon coming to power in 1933 was to take control of every single media outlet in Germany. Newspapers, radio, cinema, theater, art, everything was brought under state supervision, and editors who resisted were replaced. So journalists who dissented were arrested, editors were replaced, and within months, there was no independent media in Germany at all. Like, citizens had access to only one version of reality that was produced by the state government. The second thing is the repetition and simplicity. Goebbels understood and put into practice exactly what that opening quote told us, that the stab in the back myth, the completely fabricated claim that was created during World War II, that we need to get the revenge for World War I because we have lost it, and this propaganda was everywhere, and it has simply grew through the repetition of it. Repetition made it feel true because it was repeated so often in so many forms that millions of people came to treat it as a historical fact. And the next one is the triumph of the will. In 1935, director Leni made a film documenting the Nazi Party in Nuremberg, because this film remained one of the most innovative films at that time and ever made. It was groundbreaking camera work, choreography, editing work, and it was entirely in service of glorifying Adolf Hitler at that time. So it is a reminder that artistic brilliance and moral evil are not mutually exclusive. we can acknowledge the craft while condemning the purpose. And the last one is the Nuremberg rallies themselves. It was the propaganda event of extraordinary scale. It was designed not to communicate information, but rather to trigger an almost religious experience of collective devotion to the state. And light, sound, mass synchronized movement, and the individual disappeared into the crowd. So, the final case study is the Soviet Union, and this one has a very direct connection to events happening in the world at that time during World War II. The Soviet Union suffered the most catastrophic losses of any country in World War II because it was somewhere between 27 and 30 million people killed. And the scale is almost incomprehensible, honestly. And the German invasion of 1941 came as a genuine shock because despite warnings, because Stalin had refused to believe that there would be an invasion into the Soviet Union. So, so how did they build a propaganda narrative around that kind of a catastrophe? The answer was that the Great Patriotic War, a carefully constructed myth that reframed the entire conflict as a heroic struggle of the Russian people against fascism. So, I'm sorry, not a war of Stalin's strategic failures and not a war of occupation and collaboration, but rather a redemptive national sacrifice. The imagery was extremely powerful. The motherland calls, that enormous posture of a woman raising her arm and calling her children to fight, speaks directly to family, homeland, and duty. And it's not asking you to serve the Communist Party. It was asking citizens of the Soviet Union to protect their mother, their homeland, the Soviet Union. And Stalin's order 227, not one step back, combined propaganda with terror. And retreat was reframed as betrayal, like soldiers who surrendered faced punishment, and fear and patriotism were fused into a single message at that time. And I'm sorry, and Pravda, which literally means truth in Russian, was the main state newspaper during World War II in the Soviet Union. And the irony of that name became a dark joke at that time. Truth was whatever the Soviet state decided it was. The same strategy that was used in other nations like the UK, the USA, and Nazi Germany. They were all using the same propaganda style, having the only state-controlled newspapers and media outcome rather than having individual editors who were standing publicly. So the memory of the great a memory of the Great Patriotic War was carefully preserved and amplified and weaponized across decades. As Karen Patron research shows, that same mythology was used. So propaganda can outlive the war it was created for by several decades. So how propaganda shapes opinion? First, psychologists and media scholars have identified main core techniques, I would say, that propaganda uses to shape belief and behavior. First is the framing. This is about how something is presented, how it is said. And okay, for example, there is a quote, "We suffered a tactical setback and we lost the battle." Describe the same event, but they create very different emotional responses, because every piece of communication involves a frame, and the question is whether that frame is honest. The second is the repetition. Repetition works because our brains use familiarity as a shortcut for truth. And if you hear something often enough, it starts to feel true, even without evidence. This is not a flaw in human psychology, but rather how the propaganda exploits it. So the next one is the emotional appeal. Emotional appeal is perhaps the most powerful tool. Emotions, especially fear, pride, and bypass the parts of our brain that evaluate evidence. So when you are frightened or outraged or moved by patriotism, you are much less likely to stop and ask, but is this actually true? The next one is in-group versus out-group. This is the creation of an us and a them. So we are human, heroic, and justified, and they are monstrous, dangerous, and subhuman. Once this division is established, this thing that has happened in Germany during World War II, it has become morally easy to support violence against the out group, against these monstrous people as they were described as. And the last thing is the censorship. Censorship is perhaps, I would say, the most underrated technique. This doesn't require telling people lies if you simply prevent them from hearing anything else, from hearing the truth. And silence creates a vacuum and propaganda fills it. So, the next is the ethics of propaganda. So, now I want to raise a question here that I think is difficult. Was wartime propaganda justified? So, the case for is Nazi Germany was a real and existential threat. It had conquered most of Europe and was committing genocide on an industrial scale. And democratic governments, Britain, the United States, faced extremely genuine question like how do you mobilize an entire population to fight and sacrifice and quickly enough and to stop something that's terrible? And some argue that propaganda in that context was not manipulation. It was necessary communication. And that without it, the political will to fight might have collapsed. And if Britain had surrendered or America had stayed out of the war, the consequences for humanity would have been catastrophic. The case against. The case against here is the same technique used by democratic governments to fight fascism were also used to justify internment of Japanese Americans. So, and in Nazi Germany, the logical endpoint of dehumanizing propaganda was genocide. And words preceded the gas chambers, and the language of subhumans made mass murder psychologically possible. There is no clean answer here because I don't know. I don't know as well. Like most scholars say that propaganda was simply justified or unjustified, and what I want to hold here is that the same tools used to fight genuine evil that can also create and that the difference is not always visible in the moment. Okay, here I have the very quick quiz, and if there are some answers, I would be glad to hear them and discuss them with you. So the question here is, which of the following is the best definition of propaganda? A, that any government announcement or press release. B, information designed to manipulate beliefs and emotions in favor of a cause. C, advertising used to sell commercial products. And D, a neutral factual reporting in newspapers and radio. So, Charles?
I guess that should be B, information designed to manipulate beliefs and emotions in favor of a cause.
Yes, exactly. You're right. The answer B is correct because, okay, let's divide this. A is wrong because governments release factual, neutral information all the time, and that is not propaganda. C is wrong because commercial advertising can use propaganda techniques, but the terms are not synonyms. And D is the opposite of propaganda. This is neutral factual reporting is what propaganda tries to displace. And Charos, you were right that B captures the key elements here. It is designed, meaning intentional, and it works through beliefs and emotions, and it serves as a cause, meaning it has an agenda to work on. So Okay, here is the media literacy. So what do we do so what can we do with all of this and how do we protect ourselves? So first, here are 5 questions for this. The A news article, a social media post, a government statement, a documentary film. Okay, one, who created this message and what do they want from me? And every piece of communication was made by someone for a reason, and ask who and ask why. So you will be able to differentiate here the propaganda. Two is what emotions does it try to trigger and why. If a message is making you feel fear, outrage, or intense patriotism, ask whether that emotion is being deliberately engineered and what it is designed to make you do. Three is what facts are missing or downplayed. Propaganda rarely lies outright because more often it selects, omits, and emphasizes. And and people should ask question what is not being said. Four is what alternative viewpoints exist that are not represented. So every story has multiple sides. If only one side is present, ask where the others are. And five is this designed to inform me, persuade me, or manipulate me? Because there is a big difference that we have discussed during this lecture, and it is worth trying to identify which um, which one is trying to which one the newspaper is trying to tell us. So these questions will not make you immune to propaganda, honestly, but nothing will. But they will slow you down, and in that slowing down, that moment of critical pause, and this lies the difference between being a passive recipient of someone else's narrative and being an active critical reader of the world. So thank you, everyone. This is the end of our first lecture. If you have any questions, I would be glad to hear them. Charles?
I wanted to thank for this today's lecture because it was very informative and I appreciate getting to know much about this propaganda that happened in World War II. And yeah, I can't wait for the next lectures.
Thank you so much. I would be glad to see you all the next time. So
Thank you.
if you do not have any other questions, see you all, guys.